Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, January 16, 2025. Confirmation hearings for more of President-elect Donald Trump's cabinet choices. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says the new administration will unleash a new economic golden age. He's asked about tariffs and extending tax cuts. Interior Secretary nominee Doug Burgum talks about what the president-elect means by achieving energy dominance. And EPA Administrator nominee Lee Zeldin is asked whether he believes that climate change is a hoax. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says he will appoint Florida Attorney General Ashley Moody to fill the U.S. Senate seat that will become vacant when the Senate confirms current Senator Marco Rubio as Secretary of State. U.S. House passes a bill to require undocumented immigrants to be deported for sex crimes or domestic violence. Last-minute efforts to prevent the TikTok video app from being banned in the U.S. starting Sunday. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's final press conference is loudly interrupted by some journalists upset with U.S. policy towards Israel, and the Secretary responds to questions about the reported holdup in an Israeli-Hamas ceasefire and hostage release agreement. And President Joe Biden honored at a Defense Department Commander-in-Chief farewell ceremony. Associated Press writes U.S. Treasury Secretary nominee Scott Bessent on Thursday faced sharp questions from Democrats on tax policy, tariffs, China, Russia sanctions, and the future of an IRS tax filing system that Republicans have called to be cut. Bessent sat in front of the Senate Finance Committee for his confirmation hearing, where he told lawmakers that President-elect Donald Trump has an opportunity to unleash a new economic golden age. Bessent is a billionaire who, before becoming a Trump donor and advisor, donated to various Democratic causes in the early 2000s, notably Al Gore's presidential run. He also worked for George Soros, a major supporter of Democrats. Some of the reporting from Associated Press. And here's a few minutes of Scott Bessent's opening statement.
I believe that President Trump has a generational opportunity to unleash a new economic golden age that will create more jobs, wealth, and prosperity for all Americans. My life's work in the private sector has given me a deep understanding of the economy and markets. And while this experience will be invaluable in crafting economic policy, I have long adhered to the principle that you should know what you don't know and lean on those who do. Having never served in government, I intend, if confirmed, to be in close contact with each of you in your offices and seek your counsel. The Treasury Department plays a critical role in protecting American national security. We must secure supply chains that are vulnerable to strategic competitors, and we must carefully deploy sanctions as part of a whole-of-government approach to address our national security requirements. And critically, we must ensure that the U.S. dollar remains the world's reserve currency. Today, Americans face significant challenges in an economy that has not created enough opportunities for working men and women. We have an affordability crisis, a housing shortage, and for the first time in my lifetime, parents feel as though the American dream is slipping away from their children. The federal government has a significant spending problem, driving deficits that have averaged an historically high 7% of GDP during the past 4 years. We must work to get our fiscal house in order and adjust federal domestic discretionary spending that has grown by an astonishing 40% over the past 4 years. Productive investment that grows the economy must be prioritized over wasteful spending that drives inflation.
Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary nominee, part of his opening statement at his Senate Finance Committee confirmation hearing today. One of the big issues that senators asked him about was extending provisions of the 2017 tax cuts enacted during the first Donald Trump administration, which are set to expire at the end of this year. An Associated Press article has this line: estimates from various economic analyses of the costs of the various tax cuts range from nearly $6 trillion to $10 trillion over 10 years. Senator Michael Bennet, Democrat of Colorado, asked Scott Bessent about tax cuts.
So while the benefit went to the richest people in America, the cost is being borne by the children of working people all over this country. And that's what's going to happen now. It's $4.6 trillion this time, not $2 trillion. And then you come here, and this is my question, Mr. Bessent, and you sneak into your opening statement that we have a spending problem, and what we have to focus on, as you said, is discretionary spending after your crocodile tears about how China is out competing us. And as you know, because you're a smart person, and you spent a lot of time on Wall Street, just like your predecessor did, discretionary spending is about a third of our overall spending. 17% of what we spend is domestic. 17% roughly of what we spend is military spending, that spending you were talking about with respect to China. There are so many things I think you owe the American people after we have seen the catastrophe of the result from the tax cuts the last time and the fact that the benefits went to the wealthiest people. But don't you at least owe the American people a refund for the $2 trillion that they've already incurred because of the last round before you get to the $4.6 trillion? Can't we think of a better idea in the halls here than cutting taxes for the wealthiest people and expecting that it will trickle down to everybody else when we have the profound needs that you have talked about? When we're living in an economy, you had the American dream. We heard you say that, where fewer and fewer people can get ahead, where this generation of Americans is going to be the first generation to leave less opportunity, not more, to our kids and our grandkids, where we see massive income inequality and wealth inequality when Trump was president, when Biden was president. Can't we think of a better idea than that? And at a bare minimum, and this is tiny, don't we owe them an answer about what you are going to do to that 17% of discretionary spending, or even the third, before you come in here and say that the most important thing we should do is cut taxes for the richest people in America?
Senator, thank you. And I would respectfully disagree with much of your categorization in terms of the benefits accruing to the richest Americans. Actually, the share of taxes paid by the upper percent of Americans increased after TCJA. It went from 39 to 46%. The top 50% of Americans now pay 98% of taxes, and working families had real wage increases in 2018 and 2019, and going into 2020 pre-COVID. The CBO scoring for the Trump tax cuts got rescored by $1.5 trillion.
Make sure, because we're in the beginning of a long debate, that if you're going to rely on the CBO score for this, that you're going to be willing to rely on it for the things that you said it's no good.
Look, I'm not in love with CBO scoring.
I know that. That's why now you're relying on it. So I'm just saying, it's not funny money. This is the American people's money. We can do math.
Senator Michael Bennet, Democrat from Colorado, questioning Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary nominee, at a Finance Committee hearing. Scott Bessent was also asked about tariffs. President-elect Donald Trump has said he wants to impose tariffs on imported goods, in some cases, unless certain foreign countries take certain actions on things like immigration. The president-elect has mentioned 10 to 20% on all imported goods, 25% on products from Canada and Mexico, 60 to 100% tariffs on Chinese goods, and 100% on countries in the BRICS alliance, which includes Russia and India, if they undermine the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency. Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat from Oregon, with questions to the nominee on this topic.
Donald Trump, with no plan and no strategy, says he's going to put across-the-board tariffs, blanket tariffs on all imported goods, which means that our workers and our small businesses are going to get clobbered with additional taxes on practically everything they buy from other countries. My question here is, who would pay these tariffs? Americans or foreign countries?
So this, Senator Wyden, just to understand, so I can frame the answer correctly, do you believe that these tariffs are a consumption tax increase?
I believe these tariffs, you can call it whatever you want in terms of trying to gussy it up, they're going to be paid for by our workers and small businesses. And all through the campaign, we heard they weren't, that foreign countries were going to pay it. I think that's baloney. It's going to be paid for by workers and small businesses. So, your response.
Yes, Senator, I would respectfully disagree. And the history of tariffs and tariff theory, optimal tariff theory, does not support what you're saying. Traditionally, we see that the current, if we were to say use a number that has been thrown around in the press of 10%, then traditionally the currency appreciates by 4%. So the 10% is not passed through. Then we have various elasticities, consumer preferences may change. And finally, foreign manufacturers, especially China, which is trying to export their way out of their current economic malaise, they will continue cutting prices to maintain market share.
Okay. That's an academic view of it. But what I know is the history of this is it clobbers people of modest means. They're the people who are going to get hit. And all through the campaign, there was a big show that it was going to be paid for by foreigners, not so.
Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat from Oregon, ranking member on the Finance Committee, questioning witness Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary nominee. A Politico article Wednesday night before this hearing reads that Senate Democrats are circulating a memo claiming that President-elect Donald Trump's nominee for Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent improperly claimed nearly $2 million in tax losses and owes nearly $1 million in taxes related to his hedge fund. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat from Rhode Island, brought that up at today's hearing.
What I did read this morning is that the manner in which you have structured your partnership has enabled you to avoid the payment of nearly $1 million in Medicare taxes, and that the IRS has taken the position that the manner in which you structured your partnership to avoid those Medicare taxes does not actually support avoiding Medicare taxes. And it's probably more complicated of an issue than you and I are going to get through in the next 1 minute and 13 seconds. So we'll follow up with a question for the record. But I just think that when we're dealing with these massive issues of income inequality and threats to Medicare and all of the concerns that I think actually helped propel President Trump to the presidency, it would be extremely awkward if the Secretary of the Treasury were taking advantage of a supposed avoidance mechanism that the IRS, which you oversee, has determined actually doesn't produce that result. And somehow those things need to come into alignment. I don't know why. I suppose the easiest thing would be to go back and pay the Medicare taxes. But again, this is way more complicated than you and I can dispose of in the next half minute. But I do think it's important. I think it's really important to send a message as an incoming Treasury Secretary that everything you do with respect to your personal taxes aligns with IRS guidance.
Senator White, thank you for the question. So it is the firm's taxes, and we are up to date on all our taxes. This matter is not by us, but it is in continuing litigation. If confirmed, I have agreed to shutter my firm, and I have also informed the ranking member and the chairman that I will provision the amount that is lower than the amount that was stated in the press release that went out last night, and I will hold that until till the case makes its way through the courts. So once
that seems like an attentive response to the problem, and I'm glad you respected this actually is a problem that needs to be attended to. So thank you.
Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat from Rhode Island, at today's Finance Committee confirmation hearing with Scott Bessent, President-elect Donald Trump's Treasury Secretary nominee. CNBC was tracking today's hearing and published some highlights, as they put it. Bessent says Trump policies won't cause inflation. He says fiscal spending is out of control. Heavier Russia sanctions are on the way. He emphasizes that Trump said Social Security would not be touched. Bessent believes the Fed should remain independent. And the prospective Treasury Secretary poo-pooed a U.S. digital currency. That was the summary from CNBC. This is Washington Today. Doug Burgum, President-elect Donald J. Trump's choice to lead the Interior Department, begins a New York Times article, said Thursday he viewed America's public lands and waters as part of the country's financial balance sheet, with potentially trillions of dollars worth of oil, gas, and minerals waiting to be extracted beneath the surface. Mr. Burgum, who served 2 terms as the governor of North Dakota, insisted the United States was in the midst of an energy crisis, even as it is producing more oil than any nation at any time in history, and is the world's leading exporter of liquefied natural gas. He said, if confirmed, he intended to realize Mr. Trump's vision of energy dominance, a phrase that is shorthand for more fossil fuel production, and called that the foundation of American prosperity. That was from the New York Times. Here's part of the hearing. Doug Burgum before the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, questioned by Senator Ron Johnson, Republican of Wisconsin.
Talk about how you implement a game plan to achieve that goal of energy dominance that President Trump wants for this nation.
Well, again, I think I don't want to get caught in making forward-looking statements because the council will be formed by an EO. But I think that the intention, as you can read in President Trump's public statements, it's very simple. He wants to cut red tape. He wants to have more affordable energy for us. He wants to sell energy to our friends and allies so they don't have to buy it from our adversaries. That's how we reduce tensions in the world. And then we've got to make sure that we're doing it in a smart way, because he talks all the time about clean air, clean water. So he's basically talking about the approach that we're talking about here at this committee. This committee will be deeply involved in helping set those policies, but it's an all of above, go get it done, and stop getting in the way of ourselves. And particularly with this the AI battle, people don't understand that what's coming right now with AI revolution is going to happen during President Trump's term, where when we have generalized intelligence that we can manufacture, it's going to affect our ability to compete with every other power. And China they permitted more than 2 coal plants a week in the first half of 2023. And they're already the world's largest emitter. So we're competing against someone who's going to create more electricity, produce more AI, and could be how we lose the Cold War with them if we don't get it on. We have to do it here, and we're a country that believes in reclamation. We believe in following labor laws. China, child labor, no reclamation, no care about the environment. They're a tough competitor right now in terms of their ability to produce electricity. So we've got to get going, and we've got to cut red tape, and we've got to realize that if you shut down U.S. energy production here, it doesn't help the global environment. That's a false trade-off. It doesn't help because somebody else produces it someplace else, less cleaner than we do.
Doug Burgum and Senator Ron Johnson, Republican from Wisconsin, at today's Energy and Natural Resources Committee confirmation hearing. You heard Doug Burgum refer to the council. That's the National Energy Council, proposed by President-elect Donald Trump back in November, to be led by Doug Burgum, nominee for Interior Secretary. Another paragraph from the New York Times article about today's hearing. Democrats tried and failed to get Mr. Burgum to commit to supporting the continued development of renewable energy sources like wind, and none pressed him on how he would address climate change. Emissions from the burning of fossil fuels produced on federal lands and waters account for nearly 22% of U.S. greenhouse gases. That was from the New York Times. Energy and the environment and climate change also came up today at the confirmation hearing for President-elect Trump's pick for head of the Environmental Protection Agency, Lee Zeldin, who's a former Republican congressman from New York, and a couple of years ago was nominated for New York governor and lost to now incumbent Democrat Kathy Hochul. Lee Zeldin was questioned at the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee by Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont.
President-elect Trump has said that climate change is a hoax. You will be, if confirmed, one of the leading spokespeople in this country, representing us throughout the entire world. Do you agree with President-elect Trump that climate change is a hoax?
Well, first off, Senator, it was great to meet with you as well. I believe that climate change is real, as I told you. As far as President Trump goes, the context that I've heard him speak about it was with a criticism of policies that have been acted because of climate change, and I think that he's concerned about the economic costs of some policies where there's a debate and a difference of opinion between parties.
I would respectfully disagree with you. I think he has called it a hoax time and time and time again. And I would just say for the record that, and let me ask you this question, all right? Some of us have used the word existential threat. What we're seeing in LA right now is apocalyptic, and the other terrible weather disturbances, whether in the Midwest of this country, whether in many states that are represented right here, unprecedented floods in my small state of Vermont. We've been hit over and over again in recent years. Our state capital, Montpelier, was underwater recently in a way that we have not seen. Would you describe climate change as an existential threat, meaning that there must be an urgency to get our act together, to address it?
Senator, we must, with urgency, be addressing these issues. And today, as we talk about any way at all that the EPA can do its part to make sure that our air and water are cleaner, healthier,
staying on
safer.
the one, look, EPA has enormous responsibilities over an enormous number of areas. I'm focusing on picking up what Senator Whitehouse said. I worry very much. Do you have kids?
Yes, Senator.
Okay. I worry. Many of us have kids. We have grandchildren. This is serious stuff. This is beyond politics, my friends. This is the future of humanity. And if we do not get our act together, and that is not just the United States of America, this requires international cooperation. So let me ask you another difficult question. If tomorrow, magically, the United States Congress did all of the right things, that would not be enough. Climate change is a global crisis. It requires the cooperation of China, Russia, Europe, Latin America, etc. Are you prepared to represent the United States aggressively with some of your colleagues in reaching out to countries all over the world to cut carbon emissions?
Senator, it's very important for I, as administrator of EPA, whether traveling to the G7 or the G20 or elsewhere, to be reaching out to these other countries to make sure that there is a pressure on other nations to do their part as well. And it is my job to stay up at night, to lose sleep at night, to make sure that we are making our air and our water cleaner.
Lee Zeldin, nominated by President-elect Donald Trump for EPA Administrator, questioned by Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, at today's Environment and Public Works Committee confirmation hearing. A Fox News article on the hearing reads that Lee Zeldin earned a 14% lifetime environmental voting score from the League of Conservation Voters, but while in office, he also fought to improve the air and water quality in and around New York. He pushed back against efforts to dump dredge waste in Long Island Sound and tripled funding for the EPA's Long Island Sound program. Trump said in a previous statement that Zeldin will ensure fair deregulation decisions and enact them in a way to unleash the power of American businesses while at the same time maintaining the highest environmental standards, including the cleanest air and water on the planet. That was from Fox News. Scott Turner has been nominated by President-elect Trump for HUD Secretary, Housing and Urban Development. He testified today before the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. He was executive director of the White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council in the first Trump administration. He's also been a Texas State House member and a professional football player. Senator Tim Scott, Republican of South Carolina, the committee chair, asked him about homelessness.
I said during my opening statement that the homelessness has increased by 30% since 2020. Yes. Devastating. Do you have specific thoughts in 30 seconds or so on how you would address the homelessness issue and start bringing it down some?
Yes, sir. So homelessness, I think that we need to engage local communities and organizations, faith-based organizations, institutions that have real results as it comes to combating homelessness. I think the federal government can be a great partner, but we do need to engage those that are on the local level that have great results as it pertains to homelessness and work with them.
HUD Secretary nominee Scott Turner, questioned by Senator Tim Scott, Republican of South Carolina, chair of the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee at today's confirmation hearing. Reminder, you can find all of the cabinet nominee confirmation hearings in the upcoming Trump administration, archived at our website, cspan.org. From the Washington Post, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, a Republican, on Thursday said he would appoint Ashley Moody, his state's attorney general, to replace Marco Rubio in the Senate, elevating a close ally. Moody, 49 years old, was elected to the state attorney general's office in 2018, the same year DeSantis won the governor's mansion, and has been a vocal defender of DeSantis's policies and actions. President-elect Donald Trump is nominating Rubio for Secretary of State, creating an opening for DeSantis to fill until an election in 2026. That was the Washington Post article. Governor DeSantis introduced Ashley Moody as the nominee at a news conference today.
When appointing a U.S. Senator, I initially put out several different criteria. One, I want somebody that's going to work with President Trump to deliver on the mandate he earned from the American people. I want a senator that's going to be willing to lean in against the excessive spending and cut spending and stop the inflation. I want somebody that understands that the federal bureaucracy is run amok and it must be held to account. And we need 3 branches of government, not 4 branches of government. And we need somebody that understands the fight against illegal immigration, is willing to shut the border, and importantly, make sure any legal immigration to this country is putting Americans first. Can't be bringing foreigners in to displace our own people in key positions. So this is something that I thought about long and hard. We did a lot of research. We got a number of great candidates throughout the state of Florida, and many of them, I think, could have done a good job. But the final criteria I used was, because you can say all those things and say you stand for it, I wanted somebody with a demonstrated record of delivering results on those important issues. Talk is cheap. We need people that have demonstrated fidelity to these principles with their actions. So that is why today I'm proud to announce that I am selecting our Attorney General, Ashley Moody, to serve as our next U.S. Senator.
Governor Ron DeSantis with Ashley Moody at a news conference in Orlando, Florida today. She is a 5th-generation Floridian, a former circuit court judge and a former federal prosecutor, and she spoke about her agenda in the U.S. Senate.
What has angered me the most as Attorney General, as I have had to fight the Biden administration over the last 4 years, when we have seen policy after rule, after financial decisions, spending out of these agencies, as the agencies have gotten bigger, as they have taken more power, as they have tried to tell the states what to do more and more and more, all that does is take the will of the people, the want of the people through their elected representatives in Congress, and turns this into a country we don't even recognize anymore. And whether it's agencies making these decisions when lawmakers should, unelected bureaucrats, or whether it's international organizations making decisions that our lawmakers should, we cannot stand for that. The only way to return this country to the people who govern it, is to make sure we have a strong Congress doing its job, passing laws, and actually approving the regulations that these unelected bureaucrats are trying to cram down on the American people. And I pledge to you, as a United States Senator, supporting the REINS Act, supporting any effort to rein back in our out-of-control federal agencies, make sure politics is pushed out of it, make sure we bring down spending. I am all for that, and I've got the backs of the American people, DOJ, and President Trump on that. I am driven by many things in life. I will bring the influence of many things in my life, my experiences certainly, but I am driven by my faith in God, first and foremost. I am driven by the fact that I am a mother and I still have a kid in school. And whether it was protecting children from social media, from the dangers of fentanyl, the poison that's being pushed into our nation as the result of a wide open border, whether it's protecting our soldiers, the oldest boy in our family is a soldier. So whether it is supporting them while they are abroad or after they come home, I have their backs.
Florida Attorney General Ashley Moody with Governor Ron DeSantis at a news conference in Orlando. The vacancy to allow her appointment to the Senate is expected as early as Monday, when President-elect Donald Trump is sworn in, officially nominates Senator Rubio as Secretary of State, and the Senate confirms him. Ashley Moody would be the second female U.S. Senator in Florida history. Republican Paula Hawkins served one term in the 1980s. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Get ready for Inauguration Day with a special 48-hour marathon on C-SPAN 2's American History TV. Beginning Saturday at 8 a.m. Eastern, relive 20 presidential inaugurations in full, from Franklin Roosevelt's address in 1933 to Joe Biden's speech in 2021. Explore historic newsreel footage capturing the energy of Inauguration Day in Washington, D.C., and discover fascinating stories like the suit coat George Washington wore in his first inauguration in 1789. Don't miss this journey through history. Watch our 48-hour marathon of presidential inaugurals starting Saturday at 8 a.m. Eastern on C-SPAN 2's American History TV.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. A few more headlines. This from The Hill. Speaker Mike Johnson on Thursday selected Congressman Rick Crawford, Republican of Arkansas, to chair the House Intelligence Committee, elevating the veteran panel member to the role after he removed Congressman Mike Turner, Republican of Ohio, from the top job. The shift was a surprise on Capitol Hill, where Turner's ouster sparked an outcry from Democrats and some Republicans who were given no advance warning of the move and suspected the America First wing of the party helped push Turner out. That was from The Hill. From ABC News, former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat of California, will not attend President-elect Donald Trump's inauguration, according to her spokesperson. That article notes that attending 11 inaugurations so far, Pelosi has rubbed elbows with presidents at their inauguration dating back to her high school days, when John F. Kennedy was sworn into office in 1961. And President-elect Donald Trump posting today on Truth Social, "It is my honor to announce John Voight, Mel Gibson, and Sylvester Stallone to be special ambassadors to a great but very troubled place, Hollywood, California. They will serve as special envoys to me for the purpose of bringing Hollywood, which has lost much business over the last 4 years to foreign countries, back, bigger, better, and stronger than ever before. These three very talented people will be my eyes and ears, and I will get done what they suggest. It will again be, like the United States of America itself, the golden age of Hollywood." That post from President-elect Donald Trump. The House, writes the Washington Times, passed its second major immigration crackdown bill of the year on Thursday, approving legislation that expands the grounds for deporting migrants who commit sex offenses. The measure passed easily on a 274 to 145 vote, with more than 5 dozen Democrats joining the GOP in support. Current law already bars immigrants who engage in rape or domestic violence from entering the country and calls for deportation for any migrant already in the U.S. The new bill would expand those categories to include a broader range of sex crimes, including stalking and violation of a protective order. Reporting from the Washington Times. The bill's sponsor is Nancy Mace, Republican from South Carolina.
Under the open border policies of Joe Biden and border czar Kamala Harris and Secretary Mayorkas, our country has been ravaged by a horde of illegal aliens molesting American children, battering and bruising and beating up American women, and violently raping American women and girls. My bill makes it very clear, and if a legal alien commits a sex crime or an act of domestic violence, they are inadmissible and deportable. We aren't letting you into our country, and if you're already here, we are sending you back to yours. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle like to try to minimize this issue because they refuse to acknowledge the consequences that their open borders agenda is here, but the numbers don't lie. According to ICE, as of July, there were nearly 650,000 illegal aliens on the non-detained docket who are convicted criminals who have been charged with crimes. These criminal illegal aliens freely roam our streets, committing senseless acts of violence against American women and children. This includes over 100,000 illegal aliens convicted of or charged with assault. It includes over 20,000 illegal aliens convicted convicted of or charged with sexual assault and rape. It includes over 12,000 illegal aliens convicted of or charged with sex offenses. It includes over 3,000 illegal aliens convicted of or charged with kidnapping, and nearly 15,000 illegal aliens convicted of or charged with murder. That is who the left are defending this morning: murderers, rapists, and pedophiles.
Congresswoman Nancy Mace, Republican from South Carolina, debate on the House floor. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, Democrat from Washington State, voted against the bill.
In our current laws, those who are convicted or admit to domestic violence or crimes listed in this bill are already deportable and inadmissible to the country. There is actually no gap in the law that needs to be fixed. Instead, in a perverse move, this bill would make it easier to label survivors of domestic violence as perpetrators, to make them removable from the country and eliminate existing legal safeguards that protect survivors. This is once again a bill that widens the highway to Donald Trump's mass deportation plans. I want to talk through an example. The police show up to a domestic violence call. The victim was attacked by her abuser, and she fought back in self-defense. Maybe the abuser has some scratches on his face. It is common practice for the police to arrest both parties in that situation when responding to a domestic violence incident. The police write a report describing how the victim hit her abuser in self-defense. Under this bill, that is an admission constituting the elements of domestic violence, and this woman is now inadmissible and subject to deportation, even if she is never charged, even if a judge later rules that she did not commit any crime. That so-called admission in the police report that she responded in self-defense to hit her abuser, that is enough to make her inadmissible under this bill. And that is, again, why more than 200 advocacy organizations for domestic violence survivors, deeply ensconced in the material of what happens every day across the country, far too often, those groups are all deeply opposed to this legislation. They know that this expansive bill that eliminates the existing safeguards for domestic violence survivors will harm those exact survivors and create a chilling effect for reporting future crimes, empowering abusers to go after immigrant women and children.
Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, Democrat from Washington State, on the House floor. This bill passed by a vote of 274 to 145. 61 Democrats voting yes with all Republicans. The bill now heads to the Senate. Senate is still working on amendments to another bill on immigration that the House sent over that would detain and try to deport undocumented migrants charged with theft-related crimes. It's called the Laken Riley Act. That debate in the Senate expected to continue into next week. Wall Street today, the Dow down 68, NASDAQ down 172, S&P down 12. Story from Politico: as a historic TikTok ban looms, lawmakers are hunting for ways to save the app, sending Congress, the White House, and possibly federal enforcers into unknown territory. A group of Democrats on Capitol Hill, including Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, have personally appealed to President Joe Biden's White House to delay the January 19th deadline for TikTok to divest from Beijing-based ByteDance or face a ban from U.S. app stores. Incoming President Donald Trump, who once tried to ban TikTok by executive order, now wants to stave off the ban, potentially putting his Justice Department in a position of not enforcing a federal law. And even some China hawks in Congress say they're newly open to arrangements that could keep the app online a little longer. That was from Politico. Senator Ed Markey, Democrat of Massachusetts, at a news conference today said he has sent a letter to President Biden urging him to invoke a part of the law to extend the deadline.
A TikTok ban would impose serious consequences on millions of Americans who depend upon the app for social connections and their economic livelihood. And that's why yesterday I requested that the Senate pass the Extend the TikTok Deadline Act by unanimous consent. Unfortunately, two of my Republican colleagues objected, using hyperbolic language They argue that ByteDance uses TikTok to indoctrinate young Americans with anti-American and pro-Chinese ideas. Proponents of the TikTok ban often argue that the platform is, quote, brainwashing Americans. But when I pointed out that a senior intelligence official had filed a declaration before the District of Columbia Court of Appeals, acknowledging that the intelligence community had, quote, no information that ByteDance had manipulated content on TikTok to support China, my colleagues didn't even know what I was talking about. So here it is. This is an under oath declaration by in the intelligence community of the United States that they have no information that ByteDance has manipulated the content. None. So we have time. We have an ability to be able to work on this issue. There is no reason why TikTok has to go dark in 3 days.
Senator Ed Markey, Democrat of Massachusetts, at a news conference today on Capitol Hill. The USA Today writes the Supreme Court heard oral arguments last week from TikTok, which claims the ban is an unconstitutional breach of Americans' First Amendment rights. The platform asked the Supreme Court to put a halt on the ban. As of Thursday morning, SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States, had not released a decision. That reporting from USA Today. From Reuters, several journalists who are outspoken critics of U.S. support for Israel loudly lambasted U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken over the war in Gaza on Thursday, repeatedly interrupting his final press conference as he sought to defend his handling of the 15-month-old conflict. Israel's assault on Gaza is likely to define the foreign policy legacy of the outgoing Biden administration, despite a deal reached with Palestinian militant group Hamas on Wednesday on a ceasefire in exchange for the release of hostages. That was the article from Reuters. Here's one of the interruptions at the press conference.
Being on the receiving end, sometimes that's not always the most comfortable thing, not always the most enjoyable thing, but it is the most necessary thing in our democracy.
Reporters in Gaza were on the receiving end of your bombs. Why did you keep the bombs flowing when we had a deal?
I'm happy to address questions.
We all knew we had a deal. Everyone in this room knows we had a deal, Tony, and you kept the bombs flowing.
I'm happy to address questions when we get a chance. Thank you.
Based order on the mantle of your commitment to Zionism. Why did you allow my friends to be massacred? Why did you?
I'm happy to address your questions when we get to questions. Thank you. Thank you.
You helped destroy our religion, Judaism, by associating.
Yeah, I have a statement. Yeah, I have a statement to make. Thank you.
You waved the white flag before Netanyahu. You waved the white flag before Israeli fascism.
I look forward to taking questions when I get a chance to finish my statement. Thank you.
Your grandfather was an Israel lobbyist. Are you compromised by Israel? Why did you allow the Holocaust of our time to happen?
At the final news conference with Secretary of State Antony Blinken at the State Department in Washington, D.C. Returning to the Reuters article, Israel delayed holding a cabinet meeting to ratify the ceasefire with Hamas, blaming the militant group for the holdup, even as Israeli warplanes pounded Gaza in some of the most intense strikes for months. Palestinian authorities said at least 77 people were killed in the day since the truce was unveiled. A U.S. official who spoke on condition of anonymity said the sole remaining dispute was over the identities of some prisoners Hamas wanted released. And then envoys of President Joe Biden and President-elect Donald Trump were in Doha with Egyptian and Qatari mediators working to resolve it, the official said. That was from Reuters. Secretary Blinken was asked today at the news conference in Washington whether the schedule for the ceasefire will hold.
I wanted to ask you on Gaza, of course, you mentioned tremendous relief in the region, both with Palestinians and Israel. There seems to be uncertainty for the ceasefire, and it was announced yesterday, and it's supposed to be implemented on Sunday. That's 4 days, quite a long time. Israel has led new strikes on Gaza today or overnight. How confident are you that this ceasefire is actually going to happen?
So on the ceasefire, yes, I am confident, and I fully expect that implementation will begin, as we said, on Sunday. Look, it's not exactly surprising that in a process and a negotiation that has been this challenging and this fraught, you may get a loose end. We're tying up that loose end as we speak. I've been on the phone in one way or another all morning with Brett McGurk, with our Qatari friends, and I'm very confident that this is moving forward, and we'll see the start of implementation of the agreement on Sunday.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken at the news conference at the State Department in Washington. In another answer, he said the U.S. has had real differences with Israel on how it has gone about defending its people and has expressed those clearly at various points, but he said we've mostly done it privately, precisely because we didn't want to feed into Hamas's clearly held views that if that pressure was mounting and if there was daylight, they could do nothing. A Defense Department Commander-in-Chief farewell ceremony today at Joint Base Myer-Henderson Hall in Arlington, Virginia, where President Joe Biden received the Distinguished Public Service Medal and thanked U.S. troops and the families that support them for their service the past 4 years.
Look, if there's one thing I hope to take away from today, it's this. This is not hyperbole. You're truly the finest fighting force in the history of the world. That's not hyperbole, that's true. Everything I and others have asked of you, you've done. You've done with honor, commitment, grit, and guts. Let me close with a final request. I say it not as your president or commander-in-chief, I say it as a man who spent 50 years of his life serving his country in a different way. Remember your oath. My son, Major Bo Biden, used to call it home base. That's a set of principles of values that give you light in darkness, that guide you. It's true to the military, it's the best weapons, the best training in the world. We have the most cutting-edge ships, planes, and subs. We have the smartest, most well-trained force on earth. That's all critical. But that alone is not what makes us strong. This is not what brought Washington, this band of brothers together all those years ago. It's our values. I mean this sincerely, it's our values. American values. Our commitment to honor, to integrity, to unity, to protecting and defending not a person or a party or a place, but an idea. Literally unlike, as a student official I can say, unlike any other in human history. And that idea is the United States of America is unique in the world. Virtually every other nation in the world is based on geography, ethnicity, or religion, or some defining feature. We're the only nation in the world, only nation in history built on an idea that we're all created equal. We know the words by heart. We're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among them, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. That's the idea that generations of service members have fought for.
President Joe Biden at the Defense Department Commander-in-Chief farewell ceremony today at Joint Base Myer-Henderson Hall in Arlington, Virginia. He also spoke about what he saw as his accomplishments in foreign policy in the Middle East, Ukraine, Indo-Pacific, and the legislation passed to provide for military service members and veterans. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and General Charles C.Q. Brown, chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, also spoke, thanking the president for his service and leadership. And thank you for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word, and we'll send you the stories making headlines in Washington every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.